Kojo Nnamdi. David Granger is the presidential candidate for Guyana's leading opposition party, the People's National Congress, or PNC. He is one of several candidates from a variety of political parties, including the ruling People's Progressive Party, or PPP, who are vying for this office. Why, therefore, are we interviewing David Granger and not the other candidates? Well, for one, we are not in Guyana, and this interview will not likely have any impact on the race there. Two, for the last 50 years or so, Guyana's electoral politics have been dominated by race, with the two largest racial groups being East Indian and African. A majority of East Indian voters have traditionally voted PPP, a majority of Africans PNC. Since the country's independence in 1966, the PNC led the government for 26 years until 1992, the PPP for the past 19 years. The only real contest in the upcoming election is once again between the PPP and the PNC. The only real difference would be if the PNC comes out victorious, which is what made us curious about David Granger's candidacy. In many respects, he's a political novice, never having run for office before. He's been a brigadier in Guyana's army, the publisher of a political, literal, and cultural magazine, or literary and cultural magazine, and probably more of which we are unaware of, so we'll get up to speed. Brigadier Granger, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kojo.
What did I miss about your career in my introduction?
Can't think of anything. I can't think of anything really. My military service ended in 1994 when I retired as a brigadier. I became a publisher. I published other monographs, and I've done other texts. But in addition to what you mentioned, I am also chairman, or was chairman of the Guyana Book Foundation. I was a member of the Guyana Veterans Foundation and Guyana Legion with our old colleagues, people like Carl Morgan. And I'm involved now in other forms of public service in Guyana Veterans, Guyana Stress Federation and other sporting activities. But you had it right.
I do have to mention, full disclosure, that David Granger and I went to high school together. More about that later. For the time being, why do you want to be president of Guyana?
I think, Kojo, 5 days ago we celebrated our 45th anniversary of independence of Guyana. And you and I were young then, and we probably had dreams. And I feel that for some people, those dreams have turned to a nightmare. We had high standards of education. We've had high standards of community involvement, of public service. We've had high standards of environmental maintenance, and we've had high standards of public safety, public security, human security. And all of those standards have collapsed now. We have a very high literacy rate, a frighteningly high literacy rate. We have a terrible cocaine transportation problem. Every year the United States Department of State reports on through its International Narcotics Control Strategy report, that Guyana is a platform for the exportation of cocaine. We've got a murder rate which is double that of the United States. We've got 2 armed robberies every day taking place in Georgetown. This is a country with a population of fewer than 1 million. So because of the terrible crime situation, because of the collapse in education standards, in particular because of the high unemployment rate among young people, I think there's a general sense of alarm in the country. And people feel that simply voting for the incumbent party or voting for the old type politicians will not resolve Guyana's difficulties. And I'm here now in the United States speaking to members of the diaspora. And there are a lot of people here who want to go back home, but they want to go back to a country that is safe. They want to go back to a country where the labor force is educated and they can invest their money. They want to be able to have that sort of quality of life that they could have enjoyed maybe 45 or 50 years ago. And I think that's why people approach me. In fact, it started here in the diaspora. The diaspora approached me first. I said, look, why don't you run? We want you to run. And last October, I decided to run.
What leads you to believe you can win?
Well, this quality of support I've gotten from here in the diaspora and, of course, at home. I'm a member of the second largest party in the country, People's National Congress Reform. And over the last year, unknown to most people, both here and at home, we have been in talks with other parties, the Working People's Alliance, the Guyana Action Party, and the National Front Alliance. And we are now about 75% agreed that there's going to be a coalition. We want to form a government of national unity. So the PNC is not alone. In terms of ethnic politics, we think we've crossed the bridge. We feel that we will get a lot of support from non-African groups simply because, A, we've been able to establish a partnership with the Guyana Action Party, which is largely Amerindian, with the Working People's Alliance and with the National Front Alliance. Number two, I've gone around the country. I visited all 10 administrative regions, and I'm convinced that the indigenous population, which constitutes about 10% of the whole population, is aware of the fact that over the last 19 years, the economy has not been developed. I call it a Coriol economy. I think some bits of the indigenous economy is still anchored in the 19th century. And I think they're looking for real development. They're looking for real economic improvement, social improvement. They're afflicted by lots of problems, for example, people trafficking. Young Amerindian girls are still being taken to mining camps and timber grants. So there are problems in the indigenous community, and I think that the problem of youth unemployment has affected all strata of society, even middle-class families, children who have gone to University of Guyana. In fact, one of them was the valedictorian at University of Guyana 2 years ago, and she couldn't get a job. So right down at the lower levels, you've got people who've dropped out of schools who can't find employment. So for all these reasons, I think our party and our partners have come together because they feel that change is necessary, and we feel that more than a political party confronting the incumbent administration, you get a movement of people who want to see change in Guyana, and that's why I think we can win.
Do you think that you can bridge the political divide between Africans and East Indians in Guyana, and if so, how?
Well, it has been broken down simply because of the demographic transition which has been taking place in the country. The Indian population, East Indian population, is down to about 43%. And the third largest group in the population is the mixed group. That there are now more mixed people in the country than even indigenous Amerindians. So the demographic structure has changed over the last 10 or 20 years. And I think that any party that wishes to win will have to be able to attract substantial numbers from other ethnic groups. So yes, for that reason, I think that a lot of people who are not necessarily Indian or African will join the coalition that we are proposing to establish. But in addition to that, the issues that I've identified, the issues of public security, issues of public education, of public health, of employment, are issues which appeal to the imagination of people of all ethnicities. I'm not preaching an ethnic message, I'm preaching a message of a good life for all Guyanese, and I think more than anything else, I've been able to identify themes and topics and electoral platforms which have attracted a wide cross-section of our electorate. So I believe that no other candidate so far has been able to put his finger on the issues which have electrified the electorate up to this point in time. People want to see less crime. People want to see better education. And this is what I promised them.
You're listening to the Caribbean Experience. I'm Kojo Namdi, and our guest is David Granger, presidential candidate for Guyana's leading opposition party, the People's National Congress, or PNC. You know, they say successful politicians may not be able to read and write, but they can count. You have some reputation as an intellectual, so I know that you can read and write, and you just mentioned some numbers. 43% of the population is now East Indian. But can you run some more numbers for me? For you to win, how many Indian votes do you think you would have to get to win?
Well, let me put it another way, Kojo. In 2006, which is the last election, we have elections every 5 years in Guyana. We, the People's National Congress, that is, were able to accumulate about 115,000 votes. This year, the electoral list is probably going to come in at about 430,000 persons, which is double that we got. We feel that if we were able to maintain our core constituency, plus capture about 80% of the Amerindian vote and the mixed vote, and if we got maybe about 10 or 20% of the Indian vote, we would be home and dry. So, looking at numbers, we need to get our core constituency, people who've traditionally supported the People's National Congress, a significant part of the mixed vote. As you know, in Guyana, a significant part of the mixed people are mixed with African blood. But I don't think they're coming across because of ethnic reasons. They're coming across because of the program. They're coming across because of the condition in life, or the quality of life in the country. And over the last 19 years, you would be surprised. You walk the streets of Georgetown, you will see armies of street children, destitute people, homeless people, drug addicts, lunatics. There has been a change in the quality of life, a change for the worse. And I think people realize that under the present administration, crime has soared, narco-trafficking has soared, and the quality of human life has degenerated. And I think that is what is going to bring the votes, that is what is going to bring the numbers across to our party, not ethnicity.
So much of the political dialogue about what is taking place in Guyana happens in Georgetown. So even as you run the numbers for me, is there a way of polling in Guyana that can help you to identify which specific areas and districts in the country in which you will be able to win a sufficient margin of Indian votes that can go along with the votes of mixed people and Africans and others? Are there specific districts that you might be targeting to win Indian votes? And if so, where?
The polls have not told that story. We are not looking at geographical areas, we are looking at generational areas. We feel that the younger Indian voters are going to be the ones who will make the difference, and also women. My campaign has already targeted, if you want to use that word, identified women as a part of the crossover community, because although we've been speaking about women's equality for the last 35 years or so in Guyana, well, from the start of the women's liberation movement worldwide, we have not really achieved the equality that we spoke about. And my campaign has promised equality to women, equality in the National Assembly, equality in the cabinet, equality in government, equality of opportunity in education and every other field. So I think the women are going to be a significant factor. And the young people, we have had in our party, which no other party has had, a women's convention and a youth convention. And in that youth convention a couple of weeks ago, I challenged the young people to get 10 other young people, to bring along 10 young people. And we had a parade through South Georgetown, which is very, very popular. And I think that young people have been attracted to our campaign, have been listening to our message through the media, which are most attractive to young people, websites, Facebook, Twitter, and all that. And I think we've been able to get our message across. We are talking the language of young people, and we have promised them better education, we've promised them better jobs. And no other candidate, no other party has appealed to young people in the way that we have done. And I think that for that reason, we are looking for generational crossover, not necessarily geographical crossover. We're not, say, going to Port Morant. We're going to young people who want jobs, young people who want better education. And I think that is what is going to make the difference.
If during the course of this campaign, your main opposition in this election, the PPP, makes overt appeals to race, how would you counter such appeals?
I think people are fed up of race in Guyana. I think what has happened before the campaign started, at the funeral, the commemoration of the death of President Chetty Jagan and Janet Jagan, President Bar Jagdeo made some brazen appeals about race by accusing me of having shot 2 Indians during the elections of 1973. It's quite untrue. It was a slander against me. But I think that the amount of letter writers, even from Indian letter writers in the newspapers, and the revulsion of middle Guyana to that type of crude accusation made them stop. I think even Mr. Ramatara, who turned out to be the presidential candidate for the PPP, regarded his comments as excessive. The Ethnic Relations Committee made a comment about it. So I think that the Guyanese voters are fed up with that type of crude racism. And I'm not afraid of the slurs or the accusation because, I'm not a Buddhist, but I'll quote something Buddha said, insulting me is like spitting in the sky.
You're listening to the World Beat Experience. I'm Kojo Nnamdi. Our guest is David Granger, presidential candidate for Guyana's leading opposition party, the People's National Congress, or PNC. David Hines, who is an academic based in this country, who used to be an activist with the WPA in Guyana, and who spent quite a bit of time in Washington, where we still know him as Twilly. He's been advocating the idea of shared governance, which would take into account the voting percentage of Africans for a share of executive power. The ruling PPP seems to be completely uninterested in this idea, making it seem as if it's a kind of loser's poker. What do you think about the idea of shared governance?
Well, we are committed to shared governance through our proposed coalition, through our commitment to the government of national unity, through the mechanisms that we're putting in place. We've been laboring in the vineyard for over a year, discussing, working out details. We've arrived at something called a statement of principles. It will become a reality. WP and the PNC are no friends, as you know from our political history, but we have been able to bury our differences and come together. Dr. Rupert Rupturayan is a member of our strategy committee. We are amalgamating our committees. We're merging our campaigns. We're going to have a joint launch. Of our campaign. We're going to have a joint manifesto. So we have gone, 3/4 of the way down the road towards setting up a government of national unity. We are committed to shared governance because we were the party. We changed our party's name 10 years ago from PNC to People's National Congress Reform. Right now, the structure that is in the National Assembly is called the People's National Congress Reform One Guyana, because we are in alliance with a grouping called One Guyana. So we have gone down that road. The PPP has no interest in that. The PPP is essentially a Leninist party. It has not changed its structure. And it feels that, it doesn't need to change because over the years they feel that they've been able to defend on an ethnic vote. But that has changed now. And they have no allies. They've called themselves the People's Progressive Party Civic, but everyone knows that the Civic is a farce. There is one member of the United Force in the National Assembly, but it's not a real alliance. So I think they'll be left out in the cold. The rules of the game have changed. People do not want to see one party ruling Guyana anymore. They've had too much of that. They want to see a front, a movement in which all of the ethnic groups, all of the occupational groups, all of the special interest groups are represented. And we, the People's National Congress, are part of such a group.
For those supporters and followers of the PPP who say that those who are arguing for shared governance now are only doing so because they are in the opposition, what can you tell those people if you win the presidency of Guyana about your position on shared governance after your victory?
Our party, the People's National Congress Reform, has already signed an agreement called a Statement of Principles as early as last October. There's a prenuptial agreement in which we are committed to shared governance. So it will be a reality as far as we're concerned. Even in the 2006 elections, although our party did not get into the government, we shared our seats with members of the One Guyana grouping who were not part of the People's National Congress. So we have proven our commitment to shared governance, even in the opposition, and it will be much easier when we get into office. So I don't think that it is possible at this stage to turn back the hands of time. We are committed, and I'm very confident that, were we to get into government, or when we get into government, there will be members of our partnership parties, other parties, who will join us in government.
Let us speculate that you were to win the presidency of Guyana and the PPP suddenly experienced a transformation and decided that it too was interested in shared governance. Would you be interested in talking to the PPP about that?
Our present position is that the door is not closed to any party. Our present position is that the Alliance for Change, which has rejected our offers before, is welcome to come on board. The Guyana People's Partnership, led by Peter Ramstroop, is welcome to come on board. The Justice for All Party, led by Chandra Nayan Sharma, is welcome to come on board. I would be very happy to welcome the People's Progressive Party. What we want is the development of Guyana. What we want is to give Guyanese young people a vision of the life that we saw before us in 1966 when we became independent. And if we can give the Guyanese people an image of all of the political parties working together for the improvement of Guyana, I can't think of a better way to give our children a bright future. If the PPP were to come on board, even after the election, I would feel that we can offer them positions in our administration for the good of Guyana. There has been tremendous damage to the psyche of Guyanese people, much more than the physical infrastructure, the loss of hope, the loss of confidence, the loss of faith in the future. And I think if all of the parties can come together in a true government of national unity, that will be the best 50th anniversary gift we can give our children when we celebrate that occasion on the 26th of May, 2016.
On a technical point, can you explain the leadership structure of the PNC? The I guess, leader of the party is supposed to be Robert Corbyn, but you are now the party's presidential candidate. How does that work?
Well, the same way it worked in the United States. President Barack Obama is the presidential candidate of the Democratic Party, but he's never chairman of the Democratic Party.
True.
So our party is governed by institutions, governed by a constitution, is governed by Congress, is governed by central committees, governed by a general council. These are institutions of our party which function. The party leader is elected at Congress, and he can only be removed by Congress or if he resigns. And right now we have an elected party leader. I have been elected by a special Congress to be presidential candidate. My duties are separate from those of the party leader. The party leader is still in charge of the secretariat, there's still a party chairman, there's still a party general secretary. But I am the presidential candidate. I'll be the head of the list, and I'm leading the campaign. And I have a campaign manager, I have a campaign team around me. I am involved in the drafting of the campaign manifesto. I'm involved in all the party negotiations with other parties. So there's no conflict. There's no contradiction between the two positions. Both are legal, and we work quite well on human terms as well as structural and constitutional terms.
I want to get back to race for a second, because friends of mine in Guyana say that, in their view, the African population is falling behind in every measurable category: wealth, jobs, health, education. Is that, in fact, true? My own memory is of largely impoverished East Indian majority, with an increasing number back then, in the 1960s, of Indian entrepreneurs and business persons. What is the situation like today in those measurable categories?
In terms of your of falling behind, in terms of the economic status of groups in the country, what has happened is that the criminal situation in which there is massive narco trafficking has impoverished a large number
Allow
of
me
people.
to interrupt for a second. Is it possible some people say Guyana has become a narco state? Is that a term you can use to describe Guyana today?
Well, it's getting there, because if you look at the U.S. State Department's International Narcotics Control Strategy reports for the last 10 years, you will think we've arrived at that state. But I wouldn't call it a narco state as yet, but it has penetrated the economy to such an extent that I'd feel that if there was a sudden shutdown of the narco trade, the economy will suffer. But coming back to your question,
Yeah.
I think what has happened over the last decade particularly is that there has been a small elite group which is super rich. They've built fantastic homes, they're involved in all sorts of new industries, gold mining and trade. But there has been a large underclass, and in that underclass, we find not only Africans, but also indigenous people, indigenous Amerindians, and also many East Indians and people of mixed origin. So I would prefer class analysis rather than race analysis, that rich people of any ethnicity can get better education, could get better facilities, they can travel overseas to get health, medical treatment. But poor people of any ethnicity are suffering, and this is what is going to win us the election, because the indigenous people too are suffering. It's not an African problem alone. They're being marginalized, they're living in the hinterland. And to travel to some of those areas is extremely expensive. The transportation, the infrastructure is underdeveloped. They still suffer from people trafficking, particularly the girl children. And I think they're suffering the most. I agree with you that to some extent Africans are suffering too, because when I look at the educational system, many of the schools which had to be closed down over the last 5 years, closed down by parents, closed down by teachers, by students themselves, are in African areas. They're in poor areas, places like Ansgrove, Baggersville, the Backless, Freedom Hoop, Poor Drawing. So at face value, it seems that the African communities are suffering, but also the indigenous communities. And I think people of mixed ethnicity too, because these are the young people who don't get jobs. So it's not purely an ethnic problem, it's also a class problem. We've developed over the last 10 years a really warped society in which the super rich people seem to be reckless in their greed and their acquisition of wealth, reckless.
How would a Granger government in Guyana improve the condition of impoverishment of what seems to be an increasing number of the population?
My first step will be to suppress criminal activity. I think that is what is pumping violence in the country, and that is what has helped to divide our country, particularly along class lines. We have to deal with the crime situation. A big mistake that the People's Progressive Party administration made is not to accept the British government's multi-million pound security sector reform action plan. I was a member of the Disciplined Forces Commission, and one of my first moves would be to implement the recommendations of that commission, reform the police force, and make Guyana a law-governed society again. I think that's the first thing.
Does your military experience give you any specific advantage in that regard?
Well, luckily, at a certain point in my career, I was able to move away from purely military experience, and I became the National Security Advisor to the President, and I was a member of the Disciplined Forces Commission. I was a member of the Border National Security Commission. So my interest moved from purely defense matters into national security matters. So I would agree, yes, it has given me a particular insight and particular interest in that regard. But I think, Kojo, the more important contribution that my administration will make is in the field of education. We used to be an education nation. We used to be able to boast about our scholars around,
teachers.
But yeah, right now that's one of our major exports. We export teachers to the Bahamas, to Belize, to Botswana, to Barbados, to BVI, everywhere. We've exported you.
A lot more like you.
Yeah, a lot more like you. I always say that Guyana is a nation divided into two parts. One half is living in North America, and one half is in South America. But coming back to your question, education will have to be put on a sound footing again, and I think that is going to be the way of turning the country around. That is going to be the way of dealing with most of the problems. I think if we can get our young people back into school, if we can get more literate Guyanese qualifying, if we can get more of them employed because they're better qualified, because they are a more intelligent workforce, I think that would start the turnaround of the Guyanese economy.
You've had a successful career in the Army. You had a magazine which you later sold. You could just as soon easily retire now and probably enjoy life. Why, at this stage of your life, have you decided to enter such a high-stakes game as politics at the presidential level?
That's a good question. I'm sure if my wife would ask me the same question. I had a choice. When I was approached, people asked me to run, and I could have said, look, let me sit down on my hands, get in my hammock, or continue writing, which I love doing. Or I could get involved, and I decided to get involved. And I decided that this was the best way to spend the rest of my life, working to give our children a better future. I had a choice. Nobody put a gun to my head. And it was only after people here in the diaspora, people at home, approached me and asked me to run that I made that decision. I was backing another horse. And even the people who were with me backing the other horse said, look, we want you to run. And the rest is history.
How have you been finding campaigning so far?
Well, I've been supported by my dear wife, Sandra, and I've been supported by a lot of my army buddies. I've been supported by friends in the diaspora. The support has been tremendous. People have crossed boundaries. People have crossed old political lines, social lines. Were silent for years. People who never participated in politics have come forward and said, look, we know the country needs a change and we think you are the person to lead that change. I have been overwhelmed by the support I've gotten. Even this morning I went to a prayer meeting and people were electrified by the prayers that were offered to support my campaign. It was a very moving ceremony, and this is just one of several ceremonies that have been held. People want restoration of values, and they are confident that I can, because of my background, because of my education, because of my experience, they feel confident that I could restore those values. People want to go back home. People want to see a better Guyana, and they don't feel that the other candidates, the other parties can deliver on that vision. They don't think they can deliver on that, what I call the Guyanese-ness that is embedded in all of us, and people want to see a preservation or a restoration of those values, and they think I can do it. I know I can do it, and that's why I'm running.
You are in what is obviously a very difficult fight now of the broadcast that I've known you since high school, and the last fight I remember you being in was when we were both fairly young. And you had one of those fights by appointment, I mentioned PM, with one Nigel Harris, who is now the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. And everybody showed up to watch this much heralded fight. And as I recall, neither of you landed a punch. Hopefully you'll have better luck in the fight you're now engaged.
Well, Kojo, it would seem that Nigel, myself, and Desmond Roberts ended up on the debating team.
Sure did.
That was the last time that we were together, and we debated and won the Patrick Dargan competition. So at least we learned to live together. We didn't fight. But I met him 2 days ago. I think he's given a national award. He's now Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, and the fighting days are over.
Well, you have another kind of fight that you're involved in now, and I'd just like to wish you good luck in this fight.
Thank you very much, Kojo. I think the prayers of so many thousands of Guyanese here in the diaspora and at home, the wishes, the support that I've gotten have all been overwhelming, and
David Granger is presidential candidate for Guyana's leading opposition party, the People's National Congress, or PNC Reform. David, once again, good luck and thank you for joining us.
thank you for having me here, Kojo.
For the Caribbean Experience and John Blake, I'm Kojo Namdi. For the World Beat Experience, I'm Kojo Namdi. I'm Bob, I'm done.